Welcome to Life Stories, where we share tales of resilience, love, and the strength to rebuild. Today's story takes us on an emotional journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimately, self-discovery, when Amanda's husband shattered her world in the most public way imaginable. She chose not to break but to rise. Through pain, healing, and a newfound purpose, she learned the true meaning of love and forgiveness. Join us as we dive into this deeply moving story of courage and transformation. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey and never miss an inspiring tale. Looking back now, I could never have imagined that my brother Josh's wedding, a day meant to celebrate love and unity, would instead become the stage for my greatest humiliation. That warm summer afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina, is etched in my memory as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. The venue was breathtaking. A grand hall filled with light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden reflections onto the polished wood floors. Friends and family mingled in a symphony of laughter, clinking glasses, and murmured conversations. It was the kind of day where happiness felt like the natural state of things. The kind of day where nothing could go wrong, or so I thought. I sat beside my husband, Mike, the man I had been married to for 15 years. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his tie impeccably straight, and his posture as confident as ever. To anyone else, we might have looked like the perfect couple, but I felt the tension under the surface. For months, there had been a quiet unease, a nagging feeling I couldn't shake. A woman's intuition, I suppose. Mike had always been the kind of man who thrived on control, his career, his finances, even the emotions of those around him. He moved people like pieces on a chessboard, always calculating his next move. And that day, as we sat together, I could sense that he was preparing to make what he believed would be his ultimate move. "Amanda," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the pleasant chatter. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made heads turn. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and a hush fell over the room as all eyes turned toward us. I raised my head slowly, meeting his gaze. His smile was tight, almost predatory, as if he were savoring the power of the moment. "We need to talk," he announced, his tone deliberate. "Speak here," I replied, my voice calm and steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. I knew him well enough to understand that this wasn't just a casual comment. Mike's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've fallen in love with someone else," he declared, his words slicing through the room like a blade. "Her name is Jessica. We're going to be together. I want a divorce." The room froze. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out, leaving behind a vacuum of silence. My parents, seated nearby, looked horrified. Josh, my brother, half rose from his seat, his face a mask of disbelief. His new wife, Kelly, clutched his arm, her fingers trembling. And then there was Lily, my sweet little niece, who had been playing with her doll at the next table. She stopped mid-game, her wide eyes filled with confusion as she looked up at me. Her small hand reached for mine under the table, a gesture so pure and innocent it nearly shattered the composure I was clinging to. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream or storm out of the room like some might have expected. Instead, I sat there, my hand gently squeezing Lily's, shielding her from the tension that had suddenly filled the air. I tilted my head slightly and looked at Mike, my voice unwavering. "I know," I said, the words cold and sharp as ice. Mike blinked, clearly caught off guard by my reaction. He had expected drama, a scene that would reinforce his control, his narrative. Instead, he was met with calm defiance. "So, you agree then?" he asked, his voice tinged with smugness, as though he had already won some unspoken battle. "Yes," I replied simply. "If you want a divorce, let's divorce." The weight of my words seemed to ripple through the room. Mike's mother gasped audibly, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. His father stared down at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Even Mike's sister, Laura, who had always been his staunch supporter, pulled Lily closer to her, as if to shield the child from the fallout of his actions. Mike, however, was too wrapped up in his own self-importance to grasp the full impact of what was happening. He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my calm demeanor. But before he could respond, I added, "I have one condition." "Name it," he said, waving a dismissive hand, confident that whatever I requested would be trivial. "Never appear in my life again," I said firmly. "Not a word. Not a visit. Never again." For the first time, I saw genuine confusion flicker across Mike's face, as though my words didn't fit into the orderly world he had constructed for himself. He had anticipated tears, begging, or at least a dramatic confrontation. Instead, I was freeing myself from him, rejecting the control he had always tried to exert over me. The room remained silent as my words hung in the air. I felt a small smile tug at the corners of my lips, not a smile of sadness or irony, but one of quiet liberation. In that moment, I realized something profound. Mike may have chosen to humiliate me, but I had the power to choose my response. And that choice was mine alone. After that day at the wedding, life seemed to slow down, as if the world around me needed time to process what had happened. Returning to my home in Savannah, Georgia, felt surreal. Everything looked the same: the neatly arranged furniture, the framed photos on the walls, the vase of fresh flowers on the dining table, but it all felt hollow, as though the very air had been drained of its warmth. The silence was deafening. Friends and family reached out almost immediately. My phone buzzed with messages of sympathy, shock, and even anger at Mike's behavior. Some came with casseroles, others with tearful embraces, their concern written all over their faces. They wanted to help, to comfort me, but I didn't know how to let them. The truth was, I didn't want comfort. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted clarity, a way to make sense of what had happened and, more importantly, a way forward. I threw myself into routines, finding solace in the simple, repetitive tasks of everyday life. Mornings began with coffee on the back porch, where the rising sun painted the garden in soft gold. The garden itself became my refuge. I spent hours pruning bushes, planting new flowers, and pulling out stubborn weeds. There was something healing about digging my hands into the soil, about nurturing something that would grow despite the brokenness I felt inside. Lily, my niece, visited often. Her presence was a reminder that life goes on, even when it feels like your world has shattered. She would chatter about school, show me her latest drawings, or simply sit beside me while I worked in the garden. One afternoon, as she braided daisies into a chain, she looked up at me with those big, curious eyes and asked, "Aunt Amanda, are you sad?" It was such a simple question, one only a child could ask with that kind of honesty. I knelt down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "A little," I admitted, keeping my voice steady, "but it's okay to be sad sometimes. It helps us grow stronger." That answer seemed to satisfy her, and she returned to her daisies, humming a little tune. I envied her innocence, her ability to find joy in the smallest things. Meanwhile, Mike's life with Jessica, the woman he left me for, began to unravel. I didn't seek out the details, but whispers have a way of finding you. Mutual friends mentioned that their relationship wasn't as idyllic as he had hoped. Jessica's dazzling smile, the one that had apparently captivated him, was appearing less and less. Rumors of tension and arguments began to circulate, but I refused to dwell on them. Instead, I focused on reclaiming myself. I started journaling, something I hadn't done since my college days. Each night, I poured my thoughts onto paper: grief, anger, questions, and sometimes, moments of gratitude. Writing became a way to process the whirlwind of emotions I didn't fully understand. One day, my childhood friend, Nicole, came over unannounced, carrying 2 cups of coffee and that determined look she always had when she was about to deliver tough love. "You're holding up well," she began, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "But I know you. Amanda. You're too quiet. What's really going on in that head of yours?" I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth ground me. "I'm just trying to figure out what's next," I admitted. For so long, my life was tied to Mike, his plans, his goals. And now, it's like, I don't even know who I am anymore. Nicole reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Then maybe this is your chance to figure that out. To decide what you want. For once." Her words stuck with me. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized she was right. For 15 years, I had been Amanda, the wife. Now, I had the chance to rediscover Amanda, the woman. I began taking small steps. I signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with over the years. And I began exploring career opportunities, thinking about how I could use my own experience to help others. Through it all, the pain remained. It wasn't something I could just brush away. But I learned to carry it differently. I chose to see it not as a burden but as a lesson, a reminder of what I deserved and what I would never settle for again. Life didn't magically get better overnight. But it began to take on a new rhythm. Each day felt like a small victory, a step away from the shadows of my past and toward the light of something new. I didn't know exactly where I was headed. But for the first time in a long time, I was moving forward. And that was enough. It was a quiet evening when the call came. The house was still, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner, the scent of lavender soap still clinging to my hands, when my phone buzzed on the counter. Seeing Mike's name on the screen stopped me in my tracks. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. But something compelled me to answer. Perhaps it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the part of me that needed closure. "Hello," I said, my voice calm and measured, giving nothing away. There was a pause on the other end, long enough for me to hear his hesitant breath. When Mike finally spoke, his voice was unsteady, a far cry from the confident man who had once commanded every room he entered. "Amanda. It's me, Mike." "I know," I replied simply, offering no invitation for small talk. He began but faltered. There was a vulnerability in his tone that surprised me. "I just wanted to talk. To see how you're doing." I couldn't help the slight scoff that escaped my lips. "How I'm doing?" I repeated, the irony lacing my words. "Why do you care now, Mike?" He exhaled heavily, and I could almost see him running a hand through his hair, the way he always did when he was frustrated or unsure. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I feel lost. Amanda. I've lost everything." For a moment, I was silent, letting his words hang in the air. I had imagined this moment many times, Mike coming back, broken and regretful, but now that it was happening, it felt hollow. "What do you expect me to say, Mike?" I asked finally. "That I feel sorry for you? That I forgive you for what you did to me?" "I don't expect anything," he said quickly, almost desperately. "I just needed to say, I regret it. Amanda. I regret all of it. Leaving you. Hurting you. Everything." His words struck a chord in me, but not the one he might have hoped for. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied. Instead, I felt a deep, aching sadness, not for him, but for the years I had spent loving someone who had never truly valued me. "I don't think you understand, Mike," I said quietly. "This isn't about your regret or your guilt. What you did, it broke something in me. Something I had to rebuild on my own. And I'm not going to undo all that work just because you've realized the grass isn't greener on the other side. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking. But I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I closed my eyes, leaning against the counter as I let his words sink in. Forgiveness. It was such a simple word. Yet it carried so much weight. I had spent months learning to live without Mike, to find strength in myself. And now, here he was, asking for something I wasn't sure I could give. Forgiveness isn't something you can just ask for, Mike, I said finally. It's something you have to earn. And even then, it doesn't erase the past. There was a long silence on the line. And when he spoke again, his voice was almost inaudible. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe I just needed to hear your voice. I let out a soft sigh, the tension in my chest loosening just slightly. I don't hate you, Mike, I said, surprising even myself. But I can't give you what you're looking for. Not because I want to hurt you, but because I've learned to value myself too much to let you back in. The finality in my words seemed to hit him hard. He whispered a quiet, I understand, before the call ended. For a long time, I stood there, staring at the phone in my hand. The conversation had left me drained, but also strangely at peace. Mike's regret was his burden to bear, not mine. And for the first time, I truly felt free. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey I had been on since the wedding. It wasn't just about surviving the betrayal, it was about rediscovering who I was. And while the scars were still there, they no longer defined me. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window, the sunlight streaming through the curtains. Life was moving forward, as it always did. And so was I. In the weeks following that phone call, something shifted within me. It was subtle at first, like the first light of dawn breaking over a dark horizon. But as the days stretched into weeks, I realized I was no longer weighed down by Mike's actions or the pain of his betrayal. I had stopped looking backward and had begun to focus on what lay ahead. Life in Savannah had its own rhythm, one I was slowly learning to appreciate. The cobblestone streets, the Spanish moss draping gracefully from ancient oak trees, the slow murmur of life, it all reminded me that there was beauty in simplicity, in stillness. My days were no longer consumed by overthinking what had happened or what could have been. Instead, I found myself exploring who I wanted to become. One morning, I stumbled upon a flyer for a local pottery class at a community center. I had always been fascinated by the idea of shaping clay with my hands, of creating something tangible and lasting. It felt like the perfect metaphor for what I was trying to do with my life, molding it into something new, something beautiful. The first day of class was humbling. My attempts at the pottery wheel were clumsy at best, the clay slipping and collapsing more often than not. But with each session, I grew more confident. The gentle whir of the wheel, the earthy scent of the clay, and the quiet concentration it demanded became a kind of therapy. I wasn't just shaping bowls and vases, I was shaping a new version of myself. At the same time, I began to think about how I could use my experiences to help others. For years, I had felt trapped in a marriage where I often played the role of peacemaker, trying to navigate Mike's controlling tendencies while keeping the peace. Now, having emerged from that, I felt a calling to support women who might be in similar situations. With the encouragement of my friend Nicole, I began to explore the idea of a career in family law. It wasn't a completely new idea. I had studied pre-law in college before veering into a corporate career, but it felt more meaningful now. I enrolled in evening classes to update my knowledge and began volunteering at a local women's shelter, offering legal guidance and emotional support. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. Each woman I met had her own story, her own battles, her own scars. Listening to them, helping them navigate the complexities of the legal system, gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. And in their strength, I saw a reflection of my own journey. Of course, the road wasn't without its challenges. There were nights when the weight of their stories stayed with me, when I questioned whether I was strong enough to carry their burdens alongside my own. But each time, I reminded myself that I wasn't carrying their pain, I was helping them lighten it. Amidst all this, life began to surprise me in other ways. David, a fellow attorney I met through my volunteer work, became an unexpected source of comfort. He wasn't like Mike, there was no arrogance. No need for control. David was kind and grounded, with a quiet confidence that made him easy to be around. At first, I was hesitant to let anyone in. After Mike, the idea of trusting someone felt daunting. But David never pushed. He was patient, meeting me where I was. Our conversations started over shared coffee breaks, where we would talk about work, books, and life. Slowly, he became a presence I looked forward to, someone who made me feel seen and valued for who I was, not for what I could offer. One evening, after a long day at the shelter, David and I went for a walk along the riverfront. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the water. He stopped mid-step, turning to face me. "You know, Amanda," he said, his voice steady but soft, "I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You've been through so much. And yet here you are, building something incredible." His words caught me off guard. And for a moment, I didn't know what to say. But as I looked into his kind eyes, I felt a sense of safety I hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to figure it all out." "You don't have to do it alone," he said simply. And in that moment, I realized he meant it. As the weeks turned into months, my life began to feel full again, not because I was filling it with distractions, but because I was filling it with purpose. The woman who had once sat silently at that wedding, humiliated and heartbroken, was becoming someone I barely recognized. And for the first time in a long time, I liked who I was becoming. By the time spring arrived, Savannah was alive with blooming magnolias and warm breezes carrying the scent of fresh grass. My garden, which had become my sanctuary over the past year, was thriving. Roses I had planted months ago were finally blooming, their soft petals reaching toward the sun. Each flower felt like a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. Life had settled into a steady rhythm. My work at the women's shelter and my family law classes kept me busy. But it was more than just work, it was purpose. I was helping women who had felt powerless find their voices, their strength. Every time one of them left my office with hope in her eyes, I felt like I was healing a little more, too. David had become a bigger part of my life as well. Our relationship grew naturally, without pressure or expectations. He understood my boundaries and respected them, never trying to fix me or rush me forward. We spent time walking along the river, sharing quiet dinners, and talking late into the night about everything and nothing. But while I was moving forward, remnants of my past occasionally found their way back to me. One afternoon, my sister-in-law, Laura, called with a cautious tone in her voice. "I thought you should know," she began hesitantly. "Mike isn't doing well." There was no bitterness in her words, only a quiet concern. She explained that his relationship with Jessica had ended in chaos, and his career was in decline. He'd even started therapy, she added, as though it was an olive branch she wasn't sure I would accept. Hearing about Mike didn't stir the emotions I might have expected. I didn't feel vindicated or angry. Instead, I felt nothing. His choices were no longer my burden to carry. Not long after, I received a letter from Mike's mother, Mary. Inside was a photo of Lily wearing a daisy crown we had made together the previous summer. "She talks about you all the time," Mary wrote. "Mike sees her wearing it and finally understands what he threw away, not just a wife, but a family's heart." I stared at the photo for a long time, feeling an odd mixture of sadness and peace. That photo wasn't about Mike, it was about Lily and the love that had endured despite everything. It was a reminder that some bonds are unbreakable, no matter how fractured other parts of life may feel. A week later, I was invited to Lily's birthday party at Laura's house. It was carefully arranged so that Mike wouldn't be there. When I arrived, Lily ran to me, her face lighting up with pure joy. "Aunt Amanda," she squealed, throwing her arms around me. We spent the afternoon in the garden, weaving daisy crowns and laughing as though no time had passed. It was a simple, beautiful day that reminded me of the importance of love, not the kind that controls or confines, but the kind that lifts you up, that heals. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Laura pulled me aside. "I think he's finally learning, Amanda," she said softly. "But I also think he knows it's too late." Her words hung in the air as I watched Lily chase Bubbles across the yard, her laughter ringing out like music. I thought about forgiveness not as a gift for Mike, but as a gift for myself. Forgiving him didn't mean forgetting or excusing what he had done. It meant letting go of the bitterness, of the weight I had carried for so long. That evening, as I drove home, I realized I had already forgiven him in my own way. Not for his sake, but for mine. I wasn't tied to his choices or his regrets anymore. I had built a life that was mine alone. One filled with love, purpose, and joy. The next morning, I stood in my garden, watering the new roses I had planted. They were vibrant and strong, growing freely under the open sky. As I watched the water soak into the earth, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had learned that endings, no matter how painful, can be the beginning of something beautiful. I had found myself again, not in spite of what had happened, but because of it. And that was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. As I stood on my porch, watching the sun set over the garden, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Life, with all its twists and turns, had brought me back to myself. The woman who once felt broken had grown stronger, wiser, and freer than ever before. My past no longer defined me, it had shaped me, taught me, and ultimately set me on a path toward a life I could truly call my own. Love, I realized, isn't about control or perfection. It's about understanding, respect, and the ability to grow together. And most importantly, it's about loving yourself enough to walk away when something no longer serves you. Thank you for watching this journey of resilience and renewal. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of strength, courage, and hope. See you in the next video.